Hello, and welcome back to the 2023 International Fuel Ethanol Workshop and Expo podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by Janet Fisher, Enzyme Product Category Manager at Lallemand and co-manager of the RFA's Young Professionals Network. At FEW, Janet will be presenting on a panel titled Attracting, Training, and Retaining a Highly Productive Production Team. This panel will take place at 10:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, and Janet's presentation will focus specifically on insights into successful recruitment and retention of young professionals in the U.S. ethanol industry. Thank you for joining us today, Janet, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Of course, and we are excited to have you. So Janet, you are co-manager of the Young Professionals Network, and you're also an employee at Lallemand who sponsors the Young Professionals Network. Let's start off by just having you explain to us what the Young Professionals Network is and why it was started.
Yeah, so the Young Professionals Network was started by a young professional while she was working at RFA. That's Jackie Hayes. So a couple of years ago, she had the idea that there's not a lot of focus in the industry on how to develop our next generation of leaders and thinking about how we're going to transition from existing leadership to millennials and eventually Gen Z in leadership. So she started it. It's a group for folks 39 and under. And it's free. You don't have to be an RFA member. You just have to apply. And our focus is really to educate young people in the industry about whatever topics the whole group is interested in. It was really about getting that under 40 voice all together in one place so that we could understand better what millennials and Gen Z workers in the ethanol industry need, how their expectations may differ from what the ethanol industry is offering them, and to provide wherever we can that education and networking opportunities through webinars and in-person events.
Thank you. And as a member myself, I can add that it is a very well organized and helpful network to be a part of. So earlier this year, the Young Professionals Network conducted a survey to gauge the differences in career motivators across generations in the ethanol industry. Could you share any other objectives of this survey and what the key findings were?
Yeah, so every year, the YPN puts out an annual survey so that we can leverage the collective under 40 voice in the industry on topics to benefit the whole industry. So 2022, that survey focused on the attitudes of young professionals in the ethanol industry about the ethanol industry, really whether they saw a future in it for themselves or not, whether they saw a future for themselves at their current organization or not. And we got some really interesting findings about that spurred some robust conversations at last year's FEW. And that request resoundingly from producer management that was present at that talk was, how do I manage millennials and Gen Z? It's just not, what I'm doing is just not working. They are too different. So this year's survey was focused on evaluating the differences specifically in career motivations and work-life balance expectations of young professionals and industry veterans. We figured if industry veterans, if current leadership is asking us, I'm at my wit's end, I can't manage a millennial, I think that indicates to us that values are changing with the generations. Expectations driven by those values are changing over the generations. Needs are changing because it's a different economic environment for those coming into the industry, coming into their prime work years, that are influenced by the environment around us as we were growing up, especially, things like the Great Recession, things like COVID for sure. And I think all of these have impacted the coming generations, Millennial and Gen Z, to have very different expectations of what their career is going to look like and what success in that career looks like. So we broke this down into 3 sections: work-life balance, career motivators, and definitions of success. So work-life balance, we wanted to understand, do those over 40 versus under 40 value work-life balance similarly or differently? But more importantly, I think, is how do they define work-life balance? Has that definition changed for the younger generations? Career motivators and definitions of success is looking more at, do the different values of the millennial and Gen Z generations lead to different wants for their career? Do they have the same values as the current leadership that would lead them to make similar decisions or have similar expectations for the course of their career in the ethanol industry? And one of the really important pieces of that is to see if there's a difference between the generations around how they define success. So the key findings are that, predictably, those over 40 and those under 40 have different expectations for work-life balance and the values that motivate them in their career progress. So I can dive a little bit further into that section by section. So one of the questions that we asked is, work-life balance is important to me and critical to success in my work and personal life. And the vast majority of respondents from 18 to 70 viewed work-life balance as critical to their success in their work and personal lives. However, the definition of work-life balance did differ a bit. So the first one being, when we ask those over and under 40 to rank a handful of options to define work-life balance for them, we find that the number one element of work-life balance for all respondents over and under 40 is flexibility in choosing when to take PTO. That was far and above the number one element of work-life balance that was critical. But then we start to differ. So those under 40, their number two most important element of work-life balance is the ability to work from home. And number three is the number of paid time off days, meaning vacation plus sick time. For those over 40, there was more of a focus on how much time they were away from home, hours worked per week, and number of travel days per year. So it's an interesting difference. I want to dive in a little bit more into PTO days and, what are the expectations of those over and under 40 on PTO. They say PTO is critical, but what do they expect for number of days off or for level of engagement required with work while they're on vacation, like answering emails and taking calls? So when we look at the two groups, we do start to see a difference. The majority of those under 40, when we asked how much PTO is sufficient to maintain work-life balance, those under 40 said more than 3 weeks. The vast majority did. Whereas those over 40 said 3 weeks flat. So there's a bit of a difference in expectation there. And when we ask them, does your current role allow you the PTO that fits your work-life balance needs? We got that across the board, we saw that about a third of those under 40 do not feel like their amount of PTO is enough to fit their needs for work-life balance. So that could be an area of focus that may indicate that PTO, the amount of PTO and the autonomy to take it when needed could be a focus for recruiting and retaining those young workers. Another finding that we saw in terms of engagement while you're on vacation, and this one was really stark. Those under 40, over half of them said, for me to have work-life balance, when I'm on vacation, I will not be checking in at all. That's more than half of those under 40. Whereas those over 40, none of them said not checking in at all is necessary. They, in the overwhelming majority, wanted to check in once per day. So I think that one is very interesting, especially as generally in our culture, we're seeing a big push for mental health in the workplace. This is an extreme example of the differences in the expectations of those over and under 40. This is a big one. And I could see where it could lead to conflict in the workplace, to employees who are of these younger generations feeling like they're not heard or like they never feel like they get to completely unplug, which we're learning over time is pretty important for one's mental health. So I think that was a pretty critical finding.
What are the challenges and opportunities that were identified in developing the next generation of leaders in the ethanol industry based on the survey findings?
Yeah, I think one of the key places to look is at the career motivators, where we can see what drives the individual to push further into their career, to stay in the ethanol industry as their career advances. I think there are differences between those over and under 40 and what drives them. And I think it's important to define those. We have a big picture view here in the survey, but leadership at ethanol plants and other organizations related could really take a more individualized approach to really understand what's motivating your employees to work in this industry and how they define their success. The generations define career success differently. And, when we look at whether an individual feels like they have achieved career success or will achieve career success in their current role and in the ethanol industry as a whole, we see that a quarter to a third of them say, no, based on my definition of success, I don't think that I will achieve career success in my role or in this industry. So I think that really speaks to the importance of understanding the individuals that work for you, understanding where they want to head in their roles, at your organization or at others if they move on, and then getting them the opportunities to explore options for career advancement.
Okay, well, the last question I had for you was, do you have any examples on specific strategies or initiatives that the Young Professionals Network or the ethanol industry as a whole could implement based on the survey findings to improve employee engagement, development, and the retention among younger generations?
On the first hand, YPN is a great place to go, not just for young professionals who want to learn more about the industry, learn more about careers in the industry and where they could head, but also for the industry leadership to come and ask questions that they need help with pertaining to their workforce who are under 40, just like they did last year at FEW, asking us to present on how to manage millennials. Come to us with your requests. Come to us to let us know what you'd like us to educate the group on. And every year we survey the YPN membership to ask what they want to learn about. And we find experts in those areas and we put on webinars. We also provide opportunities for networking at some of the major events in the ethanol industry so that these folks can actually engage with industry leadership outside of their own organizations. On an individual organization level, I think it could be helpful to ask your employee group some of these questions. Maybe not exactly the survey that we used, but there are services out there that can help with this to help drill down to what are the key motivators and the expectations of the individuals in your organization, and are they being fulfilled? And if they are not, what can be done to either help that individual adjust their expectations or change the way things are done to meet those expectations? And I think at the end of it all, it is critical to understand the values that underlie the expectations and the motivations for the coming generations. If leadership understands those, it'll be much easier to build up the next generation of leaders in a way that speaks to their values and that keeps them in the ethanol industry because it matches with their values.
Absolutely. Great answer. So to close things out, do you want to let listeners know where they can go to learn more about the Young Professionals Network and if there are any upcoming events?
Yeah, gladly. So if you go to the Renewable Fuels Association website, ethanolrfa.org, go to the Events and Initiatives tab at the top of that webpage, you'll see a link for Young Professionals Network. If you go there, you can see what we're all about. You can read our year in review document, which is an overview of all of the activities of the YPN over the previous year. And you can find a link to an application. So our next YPN event is going to be held in conjunction with the Renewable Fuels Nebraska event at their High Octane Lounge, which is going to be on June 13th in the afternoon. And it would be great to see some new faces there. We try always to get not just YPN members and those under 40, but members of the leadership of the industry, certainly from Lallemand, but also from many of the producer facilities. So we'd love to see you there.
Well, thank you again, Janet. If our listeners are interested in learning more about Janet's presentation, be sure to catch Attracting, Training, and Retaining a Highly Productive Production Team at 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday at the International Fuel Ethanol Workshop. Janet, thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you and the rest of the Lallemand team in Omaha soon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to BBI, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to seeing you all at the 39th Annual FEW in Omaha from June 12th to 14th. Until then.